Why you have to make all these excuses for her? This, like I said, all this was this week was people who said, "Oh, she ran a flawless campaign. How ridiculous!" Or it's sexism, it's racism. This is an old playbook.
Yes, I didn't say any of those things.
I know, but I've heard a lot of these things, and like I think America's perfectly willing to elect a woman. They just didn't like the last two that were put up.
The vice president to Joe Biden, whether it was a male, female, black, white, or anything else, was going to have a giant political albatross around their neck, and they could perform perfectly or perform imperfectly. But that person was going to be at a disadvantage.
She didn't make a good case.
Well,
she didn't denounce the past stuff that people didn't like. She just tried to ignore it.
I've been on that MSNBC, mate. It was propagandist nutcrackery on there. I went on a show called Morning Joe. It was absurd the way they carried on.
Good Morning Joe.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know what it was. It wasn't morning. There was no one called Joe there. No one could concentrate. They didn't understand the basic tenets of journalism. No one was willing to stick up for genuine American heroes.
Bill Maher is once again challenging the usual points made by MSNBC guests on his show, and people are definitely noticing. His bold remarks are leading many to wonder if these contributors really belong on his platform, especially as the conversations get more tense and uncomfortable to watch. So, who was under pressure this time? And what exactly did Maher say that got everyone talking? We're breaking down all the key moments. But before we dive in, make sure to subscribe for more honest and eye-opening content like this.
I also think everything the candidates, especially the Democrats, do to get voters annoys them. The constant texting. Did you get the texts like from Tim Walz every 5 minutes, and like always begging for money and knocking on doors? We've got people knocking on doors. People don't want knocking on your door. Who in this day and age wants someone knocking on? Kids don't even like it when a phone call. That's like too much of a invasion of their privacy.
Bill Maher recently questioned MSNBC's John Heilemann about why Kamala Harris didn't connect with voters during the last election. Heilemann said it was a messaging issue, but Maher disagreed. He believed the real problem was how that message was shared. According to Maher, Democrats focus too much on traditional outlets like MSNBC and CNN, channels that mostly reach people who already support them. In contrast, Trump reached a wider audience by going on popular podcasts like Joe Rogan's and Theo Von's. When the usual methods failed, Democrats tried more aggressive tactics, like sending mass texts and even knocking on doors. Maher's main point? Instead of meeting voters where they are, Democrats stuck to old habits and ended up turning people off.
Who might emerge as the strongest Democratic opposition leader in the next Trump era? Oh, well, that's a good question. I mean, like Adam Schiff, he won, right? Big. And
he won big. I like Wes Moore.
Wes Moore's fantastic. He's in Maryland.
Yep.
But who's going to be the one? Gavin Newsom, we have here in this state. He's already like called the legislature to. I mean, Trump hasn't done anything yet, but I understand the.
This was the problem. You know, there was a 2014 study that showed that Fortune 500 companies were more likely to pick a female CEO if the company was struggling, basically setting women up for the big job, but to also fail. If they did well, fine. But if they failed, like, look, we have a female CEO while failing. And that's what I feel like they did to Kamala Harris. When Biden refused to step aside and not run again, he was supposed to be that bridge. He backed off on that promise due to arrogance. And then he drops out after a catastrophic debate performance, and they set Kamala Harris up to fail.
What was this journalist even trying to say? The idea seemed to be that Democrats had a clear message, and it was Kamala Harris's job to simply repeat it. That should have been enough. But here's what they overlooked. Americans were paying close attention. They weren't just listening to speeches. They were focused on real issues affecting their daily lives. Things like inflation, rising crime, and border concerns weren't just headlines. They were real problems people were dealing with. Catchy phrases weren't convincing anyone. Voters reacted based on their own experiences, and even if President Biden had delivered everything perfectly, it likely wouldn't have made a big difference. The problem wasn't just who was speaking, it was what they were saying. By then, a lot of people had already tuned out.
And they set Kamala Harris up to fail. That was a 3-month campaign, and she was supposed to introduce herself to the American people. No wonder people were Googling, did Joe Biden drop out?
No. No. You're saying 3 months wasn't long enough? It was too long.
It was long enough.
It was long enough.
If they had a primary...
It's not that they didn't have time to introduce. They met someone and they didn't like them.
Bill Maher made another strong observation. The issue wasn't a lack of capable Democratic leaders who could have stepped in for Joe Biden. There were many qualified governors, senators, and fresh voices available. Even actor Michael Douglas mentioned on the show that the talent was there. But for some reason, those leaders weren't seriously considered. Instead, the party seemed more focused on sending a message than picking the most effective person for the job. Rather than putting experience and leadership at the top of the list, the decision appeared to be more about image. The belief seemed to be that choosing a black woman as vice president would automatically win support from key voting groups. But most voters want more than just symbolic choices. They're looking for proven leadership, real plans, and someone they can trust. Focusing too much on how the choice looked instead of what it meant in practice, the party may have missed what voters truly care about. Many saw the decision as a political strategy rather than a genuine effort, and that disconnect could help explain why there's been pushback.
You're the sitting vice president, and you get put on elevated to the top of the ticket 107 days ahead of the election. I think that is a very high degree of difficulty put on anybody. And I do not think she is the perfect candidate. I tend to agree with Sarah that probably in a fully litigated primary, she probably would not have been the Democratic nominee, but we'll never know that. But I will tell you that, there's never been anybody who's had the difficulty of that situation, elevated that late in the campaign.
Why? What? To run away from
Bill, I don't know if you know this, but the vice president of the United States is basically shoved in a broom closet for 3.5 years.
I know.
You couldn't.
She was more popular in there.
Yes, well.
I mean, this idea that in a mass media age, that 107 days is not long enough to know somebody.
You are way overestimating the American people in terms of what their ability.
Let's pause for a moment. This kind of thinking is exactly what's been hurting the Democratic Party, underestimating everyday Americans. MSNBC's John Heilemann actually suggested that Bill Maher was giving voters too much credit by saying 3 months is enough time to choose a candidate. Really? That's how some on the left see voters, as if we can't think for ourselves or make informed decisions. One MSNBC host even claimed Americans don't really know what they want. But here's the reality. We do know, and it's not about backing someone who simply follows the party line. Americans want leaders who respect their voters, understand the challenges people are facing, and are willing to take real stands on real issues. If some on the left keep underestimating the public, they're in for a surprise. Come Election Day, voters will show that they're paying attention, and they'll make their voices heard. Now, let's get back to the clip. School. That's exactly the issue. Many countries can hold effective elections in just a few weeks. The fact that some still think voters need more time shows just how disconnected certain political leaders have become. It's no surprise Democrats are struggling. They're overlooking the real problems, economic missteps and policies that feel out of touch with everyday Americans. Voters aren't easily fooled. They're paying attention and remember a time under Donald Trump when things like the economy, border security, and their children's future felt more stable. This election wasn't just about inflation or jobs. It was about leadership, safety, and common sense. In the end, it wouldn't have made a big difference if Democrats ran Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, or Gretchen Whitmer. The problem isn't one candidate, it's a broader disconnect in leadership and priorities. Voters recognize that, and they made their voices heard. Until Democratic leaders take a serious look at their overall direction, not just who's on the ballot, they'll continue to face setbacks at the polls. School bill. Maher didn't hold back, and the moment left a strong impression. He pushed back on John Heilemann's claim that voters don't know enough about Kamala Harris, using a simple question to prove his point. Turning to his mostly left-leaning audience, Maher asked, "How many of you feel you don't know enough about Kamala Harris to decide whether to vote for her?" The response was telling. No one raised their hand. The room fell silent, and the pause said more than words ever could. Right then, Heilemann's argument lost its footing. It became clear that most people do know who Kamala Harris is, and many just aren't persuaded by what she offers. Heilemann tried to regroup, but the moment had already landed. That silence didn't just reflect hesitation, it highlighted a deeper issue. Voters are informed, and their opinions are formed. In that brief exchange, Maher didn't just win a point, he exposed a disconnect that Democratic leaders may still be overlooking school. Honestly, if Kamala Harris had taken a more balanced and practical approach during the campaign, stepping away from the far-left